subscribe to my channel. Thank you.
How can you ensure data redundancy and high availability for Azure Blob Storage using locally redundant storage (LRS)? Locally redundant storage (LRS) replicates data within the same data center in a region, providing redundancy and high availability. Data is stored in multiple replicas, ensuring data durability even in the event of hardware failures. Explain how Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 enhances data analytics capabilities compared to traditional Azure Blob Storage. Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 combines the capabilities of Azure Blob Storage with a hierarchical file system, enabling efficient data analytics. It supports data lakes, analytics frameworks, and big data scenarios with improved performance and security. How can you implement cross-origin resource sharing (CORS) for Azure Blob Storage to enable web applications to access resources from different domains? You can configure cross-origin resource sharing (CORS) settings in Azure Blob Storage to specify which domains are allowed to make cross-origin requests. This enables web applications hosted on those domains to access storage resources securely. Explain the concept of hot, cool, and archive access tiers in Azure Blob Storage and their use cases. Azure Blob Storage offers 3 access tiers: hot, for frequently accessed data; cool, for infrequently accessed data; and archive, for long-term archival storage. Each tier has different pricing and is suitable for different usage patterns and data retention needs. How can you implement data replication for Azure Blob Storage across multiple regions using geo-replication? Geo-replication in Azure Blob Storage allows you to replicate data to a secondary region. By enabling this feature, you create a secondary copy of your data that remains available and up-to-date in a different region, ensuring data durability and availability. Explain how to implement data archiving and retention policies using soft delete and blob lifecycle management in Azure Blob Storage. By enabling soft delete in Azure Blob Storage, you retain deleted blobs for a specified retention period. Additionally, you can use blob lifecycle management policies to automatically transition data to the archive tier based on access patterns. How can you ensure secure data transfer from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage using Azure Data Box Disk? Azure Data Box Disk is a portable storage device that you can use to transfer data from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage. You copy your data onto the device, ship it to Microsoft, and the data is uploaded to your storage account. Explain the benefits of using Azure Blob Storage as a data lake for storing and analyzing large volumes of unstructured data. Azure Blob Storage can serve as a data lake for storing large volumes of unstructured data like text or binary data. It provides scalability, cost-effectiveness, and compatibility with analytics services, enabling efficient data processing and analysis. How can you implement secure transfer required setting in Azure Blob Storage to enforce data encryption in transit? Enabling this secure transfer required setting in Azure Blob Storage ensures that data transferred to and from the storage account is encrypted during transit. It enforces the use of secure HTTPS connections for data transfer, enhancing data security. Explain how Azure Storage's versioning feature can be used for data protection and recovery. Azure Storage's versioning feature allows you to maintain multiple versions of blobs, preserving previous states of data. It provides protection against accidental modifications or deletions, enabling data recovery and maintaining data history. How can you implement virtual network service endpoints for Azure Blob Storage to secure access from a virtual network? Virtual network service endpoints allow you to secure access to Azure Blob Storage resources from your virtual network. By enabling this feature, you ensure that data traffic between your virtual network and storage remains within the Microsoft network. Explain how Azure Files can be used to create SMB file shares that can be accessed and managed across Azure and on-premises environments. Azure Files provides managed SMB file shares that can be accessed by multiple clients across Azure and on-premises environments. This allows you to share files, store configuration data, and implement centralized file storage solutions. How can you implement granular access control and fine-grained permissions for Azure Blob Storage using Shared Access Signatures (SAS) with Stored Access Policies? Stored access policies allow you to create predefined sets of permissions for Shared Access Signatures (SAS) tokens. By associating SAS tokens with stored access policies, you centralize and manage permissions for different types of access scenarios. Explain how to optimize data storage costs for Azure Blob Storage using Blob Storage Lifecycle Management Policies. Azure Blob Storage Lifecycle Management Policies allow you to automatically transition data to different access tiers based on defined rules. By moving less frequently accessed data to lower cost tiers, you optimize storage costs while maintaining data availability. How can you implement data synchronization between on-premises environments and Azure Blob Storage using Azure File Sync and Azure Data Factory? Azure File Sync can be used to synchronize on-premises file servers with Azure Blob Storage. Additionally, Azure Data Factory enables you to create data pipelines that automate data movement between on-premises environments and Azure Blob Storage. Explain the benefits of using Azure Storage Service Encryption with customer-managed keys for data protection. Azure Storage Service Encryption with customer-managed keys allows you to use your own encryption keys to encrypt data at rest. This provides additional control and ownership of encryption keys, enhancing data security and compliance. How can you implement tiering policies in Azure Blob Storage to optimize costs and access patterns? Azure Blob Storage's tiering feature allows you to set up policies that automatically transition data between access tiers based on access patterns. This helps optimize costs by placing data in the appropriate tier based on its usage frequency. Explain how page blobs and block blobs differ in terms of use cases and access patterns. Page blobs are optimized for random read and write operations, making them suitable for virtual machine disks and database storage. Block blobs, on the other hand, are optimized for sequential write and read operations, often used for file storage and data backups. How can you ensure data durability and availability in Azure Blob Storage using Geo-Redundant Storage (GRS)? Geo-Redundant Storage (GRS) replicates data to a secondary region, providing data durability and availability in the event of a regional outage. Data is stored in multiple replicas in both the primary and secondary regions. Explain the purpose of soft delete for blobs in Azure Blob Storage and how it helps in data recovery. Soft delete for blobs retains deleted blobs for a specified retention period. This feature provides a safety net against accidental deletions, allowing you to recover deleted blobs within the retention window and avoid data loss. How can you implement secure and authorized data access to Azure Blob Storage using Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens and stored access policies? Stored access policies allow you to define sets of permissions for different types of access scenarios. By associating Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens with stored access policies, you can ensure consistent and controlled data access. Explain how Azure Storage Account Key Rotation enhances security for Azure Storage resources. Azure Storage Account Key Rotation involves periodically regenerating the storage account keys. This practice enhances security by mitigating the risk of unauthorized access due to compromised or leaked keys. How can you enable secure and authorized data access from an on-premises network to Azure Blob Storage using Service Endpoints and Azure Express Route? Service Endpoints allow you to secure data access from your on-premises network to Azure Blob Storage by keeping the traffic within the Azure network. Additionally, Azure Express Route establishes a dedicated private connection between your network and Azure, ensuring secure and private data transfer. Explain how Azure Blob Storage's versioning feature can be used for data protection and recovery. Azure Blob Storage's versioning feature allows you to maintain multiple versions of blobs. This feature helps in data protection by allowing you to revert to previous states in case of accidental changes or deletions, ensuring data recovery. How can you optimize data transfer performance to and from Azure Blob Storage using Azure DataBox? Azure DataBox is a physical data transfer device that you can use to move large volumes of data to and from Azure Blob Storage. You copy your data onto the device, ship it to Microsoft, and the data is ingested into or extracted from your storage account. Explain how Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens can be used to grant temporary and controlled access to Azure Storage resources. Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens allow you to grant temporary and specific access permissions to Azure Storage resources. By generating SAS tokens with desired constraints, you can control who can access your resources and for how long. How can you enable secure data transfer to Azure Blob Storage using Azure Private Link? Azure Private Link allows you to securely access Azure Blob Storage over a private connection. By using Private Link, data traffic between your network and storage resources is routed through a private network, isolating it from the public internet. Explain how to implement data archiving using Azure Blob Storage Lifecycle Management policies and the Archive Access tier. Azure Blob Storage Lifecycle Management policies can be configured to automatically transition data to the Archive Access tier after a specified period of inactivity. This reduces storage costs while maintaining accessibility to archive data. How can you implement Event Grid with Azure Blob Storage to trigger actions based on blob-related events? Event Grid can be used with Azure Blob Storage to create event-driven workflows that trigger actions based on blob-related events, such as new blob creations or deletions. This enables automation of processes based on storage events. Explain how time-based retention in Azure Blob Storage can be used to ensure compliance with data retention policies. Time-based retention in Azure Blob Storage allows you to enforce data retention policies by preventing data deletion or modification for a specified period. This feature ensures compliance with regulations requiring data to be retained for a specific duration. How can you implement cross-region replication for Azure Blob Storage using geo-replication and Read Access Geo-Redundant Storage (RAG-RES)? Geo-replication allows you to replicate data across regions. Read Access Geo-Redundant Storage (RAG-RES) extends this replication by enabling read access to the secondary region. This provides additional redundancy and access options for your data. Explain how to use blob versioning in Azure Blob Storage to maintain historical versions of blobs. Blob versioning in Azure Blob Storage automatically maintains historical versions of blobs. Each time a blob is updated or overwritten, a new version is created. This helps track changes, recover previous states, and meet compliance requirements. How can you implement data archiving for Azure Table Storage using Time-to-Live (TTL) settings? Time-to-Live (TTL) settings in Azure Table Storage allow you to set an expiration time for entities. Once the TTL period expires, the entities are automatically deleted. This feature helps in implementing data archiving and retention policies. Explain the concept of append blobs in Azure Blob Storage and their use in scenarios involving data append operations. Append blobs in Azure Blob Storage are designed for scenarios where data needs to be appended sequentially. They are suitable for scenarios such as logging and audit trails, where data is added in a sequential manner over time. How can you ensure secure data transfer from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage using Azure DataBox Gateway? Azure DataBox Gateway is a virtual appliance that can be deployed on-premises to facilitate secure and efficient data transfer to Azure Blob Storage. It provides caching, data compression, and encryption for data being transferred. Explain how Azure Blob Storage triggers can be used with Azure Functions to automate actions based on storage events. Azure Blob Storage triggers and Azure Functions allow you to create event-driven workflows that respond to storage events, such as new blob creations. You can automate processes like data processing, notifications, and integrations based on these events. How can you implement secure data access to Azure Storage resources from a virtual network using virtual network service endpoints? Virtual Network Service endpoints allow you to secure data access to Azure Storage resources by extending your virtual network's private address space to the storage account. This prevents public internet access to the storage resources. Explain how to implement access control and data protection for Azure Blob Storage using Shared Access Signature, SAS, tokens with specific permissions and constraints. Shared Access Signature, SAS, tokens can be generated with specific permissions, constraints, and expiration times. This allows you to grant temporary and controlled access to Azure Blob Storage resources without exposing your account keys. How can you implement soft delete for containers in Azure Blob Storage for data protection and recovery? Soft delete for containers retains deleted containers and their contents for a specified retention period. This feature provides a safety net against accidental deletions, allowing you to recover deleted containers and their data within the retention window. Explain how Blob Storage Replication Options LRS, GRS, ZRES provide data durability and availability in Azure Blob Storage. Azure Blob Storage offers multiple replication options: locally redundant storage, LRS, for data replication within a data center, GEO. How can you implement data archiving and retention policies in Azure Blob Storage using Blob Lifecycle Management and the Cool and Archive access tiers? Azure Blob Storage's Blob Lifecycle Management policies can be used to automatically transition data between the Cool and Archive access tiers based on access patterns. This helps optimize storage costs while retaining data accessibility. Explain how soft delete and legal hold features in Azure Blob Storage help in data protection and compliance. Soft delete in Azure Blob Storage retains deleted data for a specified retention period. Legal hold prevents data from being modified or deleted, ensuring data integrity and compliance with regulatory requirements. How can you implement data replication and failover across regions using Read Access Geo-Redundant Storage, RAGRES, in Azure Blob Storage? Read Access Geo-Redundant Storage, RAGRES, replicates data across regions for disaster recovery. In addition to data replication, it provides read access to the secondary region, enhancing data availability during regional outages. Explain how immutable blob storage in Azure Blob Storage can be used for data compliance and protection against unauthorized changes. Immutable blob storage allows you to create blobs that are write once and cannot be modified or deleted during a specified retention period. This feature ensures data integrity, compliance, and protection against tampering. How can you optimize data storage costs in Azure Blob Storage using blob tiering and blob lifecycle management policies? By configuring blob tiering settings and blob lifecycle management policies, you can automatically transition data between different access tiers based on access patterns. This helps optimize storage costs while maintaining data availability. Explain how to implement access control to Azure Storage resources using Shared Access Signature, SAS, tokens with specific permissions. Shared Access Signature, SAS, tokens can be generated with specific permissions, such as read, write, or delete. By using SAS tokens, you grant temporary and granular access to Azure Storage resources without sharing account keys. How can you enable secure and authorized data access to Azure Storage resources from on-premises environments using private endpoints and Azure Express Route? Private endpoints allow you to securely access Azure Storage resources from your virtual network. Azure Express Route establishes a dedicated private connection between your on-premises network and Azure, ensuring secure and private data transfer. Explain the use cases and benefits of block blobs in Azure Blob Storage. Block blobs in Azure Blob Storage are suitable for storing large amounts of unstructured data, such as images, videos, and backups. They allow for efficient uploading and downloading of data in chunks, making them ideal for file storage scenarios. How can you implement data synchronization between Azure Blob Storage and on-premises SQL Server databases using Azure Data Factory? Azure Data Factory can be used to create data pipelines that move data between Azure Blob Storage and on-premises SQL Server databases. By defining source and destination settings, you automate data synchronization processes. Explain how soft delete and snapshot features in Azure Blob Storage contribute to data protection and recovery. Soft delete retains deleted data for a retention period, enabling data recovery. Snapshots create read-only copies of blobs at specific points in time, allowing you to recover data from previous states. How can you implement data access control for Azure Blob Storage using Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, and RBC? Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, can be integrated with Azure Blob Storage to control access using role-based access control, RBC. By assigning roles and permissions to users and groups, you ensure authorized and secure data access. Explain how blob leases in Azure Blob Storage can be used for coordinated access and preventing conflicts. Blob leases in Azure Blob Storage provide a way to control write access to a blob. By acquiring a lease, you prevent other clients from modifying the blob, ensuring coordinated and conflict-free access during updates. How can you enable data archiving and retention for Azure Blob Storage using blob versioning? Blob versioning in Azure Blob Storage maintains historical versions of blobs. By using this feature, you can retain and archive previous states of blobs over time, helping with data compliance and data recovery. Explain how Shared Access Signature, SAS, tokens with stored access policies can be used for controlled data access in Azure Blob Storage. Stored access policies allow you to define sets of permissions and constraints for specific scenarios. By using Shared Access Signature, SAS, tokens with stored access policies, you ensure consistent and controlled access to Azure Storage resources. How can you implement secure and authorized data transfer to Azure Blob Storage using Azure DataBox Edge? Azure DataBox Edge is an appliance that can be deployed on premises to facilitate secure data transfer to Azure Blob Storage. It provides data caching, encryption, and data transfer acceleration, ensuring efficient and secure data movement. Explain the benefits of using Azure Blob Storage for storing backup data. Azure Blob Storage provides scalability, durability, and cost-effectiveness, making it suitable for storing backup data. With multiple access tiers and lifecycle management policies, you can optimize storage costs while ensuring data availability. How can you implement cross-region replication for Azure Blob Storage using geo-replication and zone-redundant storage, ZRES? Geo-replication replicates data across regions, while zone-redundant storage, ZRS, replicates data across availability zones within a region. By using both features, you enhance data availability and durability across regions and zones. How can you optimize data storage costs for Azure Blob Storage using Cool and Archive access tiers? Azure Blob Storage offers Cool and Archive access tiers with lower storage costs for infrequently accessed and archival data. By transitioning data to these tiers based on usage patterns, you can save costs while maintaining data accessibility. Explain the use cases and benefits of table storage in Azure Storage Services. Azure Table Storage is suitable for storing structured NoSQL data, such as key-value pairs. It is commonly used for scenarios like storing configuration data, logging, and managing large datasets that require fast access and scalability. How can you enable secure data transfer to and from Azure Blob Storage using Azure Storage Explorer and AZ Copy? Azure Storage Explorer is a graphical tool that provides a user-friendly interface for uploading and managing data in Azure Blob Storage. AZ Copy is a command-line tool that allows you to copy data to and from storage accounts with high performance and security. Explain the concept of Geo-Zone Redundant Storage, GZRES, in Azure Blob Storage and its benefits. Geo-Zone Redundant Storage, GZRES, replicates data across availability zones within a primary region and also keeps a secondary copy in a secondary region. This provides enhanced data durability and availability even during regional outages. How can you implement data access control and secure data transfer to Azure Blob Storage using Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens? Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens can be used to grant temporary and specific access to Azure Blob Storage resources. By generating SAS tokens with appropriate permissions and constraints, you ensure secure data access and transfer. Explain how soft delete for blobs and soft delete for containers work in Azure Blob Storage. Soft delete for blobs and soft delete for containers retain deleted blobs and containers for a retention period. During this period, you can recover deleted blobs and containers, helping to protect against accidental data loss. How can you implement cross-region replication for Azure Blob Storage using geo-replication and zone-redundant storage (ZRES)? Geo-replication replicates data across regions, providing disaster recovery capabilities. Zone-redundant storage (ZRS) replicates data across availability zones within a region, enhancing data availability and durability. Explain the concept of geo-redundant storage (GRS) in Azure Blob Storage and its benefits. Geo-redundant storage (GRS) replicates data to a secondary region for disaster recovery purposes. It maintains a secondary copy of your data in a separate region, ensuring data availability even in the event of a regional outage. How can you implement access control and data protection for Azure Blob Storage using Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens with stored access policies? Stored access policies allow you to manage and apply predefined sets of permissions for Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens. By associating SAS tokens with stored access policies, you ensure consistent and controlled data access. Explain the use cases and benefits of Azure File Sync in Azure Storage. Azure File Sync allows you to synchronize on-premises file servers with Azure file shares. It provides centralized file storage, data caching, and efficient data transfer between on-premises environments and Azure, enhancing data availability and collaboration. How can you enable secure data transfer to Azure Blob Storage using Azure DataBox and Azure DataBox Edge? Azure DataBox is a physical data transfer appliance for large-scale data movement. Azure DataBox Edge is an appliance that combines data transfer capabilities with AI and machine learning inference at the edge, enabling efficient and secure data transfer. Explain how blob leases in Azure Blob Storage can be used for concurrency control and coordination. Blob leases in Azure Blob Storage allow you to control write access to a blob, preventing conflicts in concurrent updates. By acquiring a lease, you ensure that only one client can modify the blob at a time, ensuring coordinated and conflict-free access. How can you implement data synchronization between Azure Blob Storage and Azure SQL Database using Azure Data Factory? Azure Data Factory can be used to create data pipelines that move data between Azure Blob Storage and Azure SQL Database. By defining source and destination settings, you automate data synchronization processes between storage and databases. Explain how Blob Storage Lifecycle Management policies can be used to optimize data storage costs in Azure Blob Storage. Blob Storage Lifecycle Management policies allow you to automatically transition data between access tiers based on access patterns. By moving data to the appropriate tier, you optimize storage costs while ensuring data availability. How can you enable secure data transfer from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage using Azure DataBox Disk? Azure DataBox Disk is a portable storage device that you can use to securely transfer data from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage. You load your data onto the device, ship it to Microsoft, and the data is ingested into your storage account. Explain how to implement access control for Azure Blob Storage using Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, Authentication, and Role-Based Access Control, RBC. Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, Authentication allows you to use Azure AD credentials to access Azure Blob Storage resources. By implementing Role-Based Access Control, RBC, you can assign specific roles and permissions to users and groups, controlling their access to storage resources. How can you enable secure data transfer from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage using Azure Databox Gateway? Azure Databox Gateway is a virtual appliance that facilitates secure data transfer from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage. It provides caching, compression, and encryption for data being transferred, ensuring efficient and secure data movement. Explain how append blobs in Azure Blob Storage can be used for scenarios involving data append operations. Append blobs are designed for scenarios where data needs to be appended sequentially. They are suitable for scenarios such as logging, audit trails, and scenarios where data is added incrementally over time. How can you ensure data security for Azure Blob Storage using Azure Private Endpoint? Azure Private Endpoint allows you to securely access Azure Blob Storage over a private connection. By using Private Endpoint, data traffic between your network and storage resources is isolated from the public internet, enhancing data security. Explain the concept of blob service properties in Azure Blob Storage and its impact on data management. Blob service properties in Azure Blob Storage allow you to configure settings that impact the behavior of the blob service. These settings include features like soft delete, versioning, and immutable blob storage, which influence data management and protection. How can you implement data access control and authorization for Azure Blob Storage using Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, and Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens? Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, can be integrated with Azure Blob Storage to control access using Azure AD authentication. Shared Access Signature. Explain how to implement data archiving and retention policies using soft delete and immutable blob storage in Azure Blob Storage. Soft delete retains deleted data for a specified retention period, allowing recovery. Immutable blob storage prevents data modifications during a set retention interval. Together, these features help in implementing data archiving and compliance. Explain the benefits of using Azure Blob Storage for storing and delivering content for web applications. Azure Blob Storage can be used to store and deliver static content for web applications, such as images, videos, and documents. It offers high scalability, low latency, and content distribution through features like Azure Content Delivery Network, CDN. How can you implement data synchronization between Azure Blob Storage and Azure Databricks using Azure Databricks Delta and Azure Data Factory? Azure Databricks Delta enables data synchronization between Azure Blob Storage and Azure Databricks, providing optimized data management and analytics. Azure Data Factory can be used to orchestrate and automate data movement between these services. Explain how to enable secure data access to Azure Blob Storage from virtual networks using Virtual Network Service Endpoints and Private Link. Virtual Network Service Endpoints allow you to secure data access to Azure Blob Storage by extending your virtual network's private address space to the storage account. Private Link establishes a private connection between your network and storage, isolating data traffic from the public internet. How can you implement granular access control to Azure Blob Storage using Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens with specific permissions and resource constraints? Shared Access Signature (SAS) tokens can be generated with specific permissions, resource constraints, and expiration times. This allows you to grant temporary and controlled access to Azure Blob Storage resources without exposing your account keys. Explain how blob versioning in Azure Blob Storage can be used for data protection and recovery. Blob versioning maintains historical versions of blobs, allowing you to recover previous states and protect against accidental changes or deletions. This feature helps in data protection, recovery, and compliance. How can you implement data archiving and retention policies using Blob Lifecycle Management and the Archive Access tier? Blob Lifecycle Management policies can automatically transition data to the Archive Access tier after a defined period. This helps implement data archiving and retention policies while optimizing storage costs for less frequently accessed data. Explain the concept of geo-redundant storage (GRS) and Read Access Geo-Redundant Storage (RAGRES) in Azure Blob Storage. Geo-Redundant Storage (GRS) replicates data to a secondary region for disaster recovery. Read Access Geo-Redundant Storage (RAGRES) extends this replication by providing read access to the secondary region, enhancing data availability and disaster recovery capabilities. How can you optimize data storage costs in Azure Blob Storage using Blob Storage Lifecycle Management, policies, and the Cool and Archive access tiers? Blob Storage Lifecycle Management policies can automatically transition data to the appropriate access tiers based on usage patterns. By using Cool and Archive tiers for less frequently accessed data, you optimize storage costs while ensuring data availability.
Hey, if you like the content, please subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a bite of Azure brilliance.